I want to start this video off by saying in my last review I made a mistake. Well, my last review of Carnage Black, White, and Blood, I made a mistake. I thought these stories were all interconnected, which I was wrong. They are solo stories, each issue. Well, the first issue only had one story, this issue has three stories. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because my review of last issue was pretty high, because I thought there was going to be more about what was happening later on. But it turns out that's not going to happen. So, in my opinion, it makes my last review a little hypocritical for me to start this off by saying I thought the last issue was honestly kind of weak. It wasn't horrible in any capacity, don't get me wrong. And I'm not trying to be overly critical, because I did enjoy it. It just, as on its own, it's really not much. I think it's attempting to have an inside out of Shriek and Carnage's relationship, but it doesn't go into depth as much as it could if it was an ongoing story. Instead, we really just get glimpses of what that means to Carnage, and we don't even get Shriek's perspective on their relationship, which I mean makes sense because Carnage is comic. But I feel like the story could have been a lot more interesting if it goes on with both characters starting to show their perspective on each other. And maybe I don't want to be too hypocritical, and I feel like I am being a little bit mean by saying that I think last week's issue was a little weak. But on honesty, I wasn't the biggest fan of how it seemed like it was trying to set up that more was going to come when it never will. So I'm just gonna keep that set in mind, that these stories are one shots, that they're not going to keep on coming, which I should have known, and I'm stupid, yeah. So I apologize. Like I said, has three stories: Carnage Shark, My Red Hands, and My Name is Carnage. Well, personally, I really didn't care, and I really didn't like the Carnage Shark story about a shark that Carnage was possessing and eating fishermen. Nor did I really care that much about My Name is Carnage. It wasn't bad, but was definitely not as good as the second story. The second story, Red Hands, is hands down the best Carnage short story I've ever read, focusing on Carnage taking advantage of a young boy named Brandon, who's sick and tired of his stepfather's abuse. Carnage uses this boy to kill his stepdad and wants to use him as a method of breaking Spider-Man, making him watch to turn an innocent boy into a ruthless killer, which he kinda did. But in the end, Brandon betrays Carnage, but not because for the reasons why you might think. He doesn't betray him because of the manipulation that Carnage does to Brandon. Brandon doesn't care. He's perfectly used to manipulation due to his stepfather. And Carnage doesn't actually physically abuse him, which to him is probably a step up. The reason why he betrays Carnage is actually because he wanted to be alone. He didn't want anybody. He didn't want to be his nearest stepdad, Carnage, his mom, Spider-Man. He just wanted to be left alone. This story blew me away. It made both Brandon and Carnage come across as complex. Brandon wasn't a run-of-the-mill victim, especially when you consider the fact that he actually survived. Well, there is a cliffhanger where you see a little bit of Carnage sneaking up on Brandon, but Brandon, we don't see that he dies, so I'm going to go on the assumption he survived, even though that might be implying that Carnage is going to take revenge on Brandon, but we didn't see that. The story also shows how scary Carnage can be. While he's certainly insane, he's not stupid. He's manipulative, intelligent, competent. Although I didn't like the first and third story, they are a part of this comic, so I should talk about them. I would like to say that the third story is fine. Not my favorite by far. I think the whole trucker bar situation, it's pretty standard. I just read the Poison Ivy comic and they have almost an identical plot line. The trucker comes in, the trucker leaves after trying to get in a fight with somebody, and then they get killed. Literally the exact same thing. But that's not saying that either of them are copying each other, because that is a run-of-the-mill, stereotype or plot point that is in a lot of comics. Not even just comics, like literally all media at this point. So I'm not saying that it was bad in any sense, but it was practically pretty generic. Well, I'm gonna be honest, I really, really didn't like the first story. The whole stuff of Carnage possessing a shark and eating a bunch of fishermen. And there was randomly like a bunch of Venoms that attacked him. I was very confused. I was trying to figure out like if this story was like an ongoing thing for maybe another comic, but I couldn't find anything. So if this was just the one story thing, I really did not like the whole Carnage possessing a shark, and I don't know what was going on because Venom at the end ate Carnage, or Venoms at the end ate Carnage. The reason I'm not going to go into complete detail of those two stories, the third and the first, because I don't want to make this video too long. And personally, I didn't really. They're pretty generic and um, very simple. Unlike the second story, which I thought was a lot more complex, which is the reason why I really like the second story. Either way, I will be honest. I'm not entirely sure if I'll continue reading this comic because I, so far, I'm not trying. I feel like I'm being too critical. I like some of it. Some of it, though, I'm not the biggest fan of. For example, I'm excited to see Carnage again, but I feel like, for example, he seems very like different in each story, which I think is interesting in itself. You can see that different writers have different takes on the character. Last week's story that I read with Carnage showed that the writer tried to make him more compassionate with love and stuff. But this time, the take on Carnage is more about how manipulative he is. I don't know what the shark one was trying to say, that he was like a predator, and that he's a cannibal. Maybe that's what they're trying to say. I don't know. They also made, I don't know if this was an accident or if I missed something, but Carnage's name was spelled wrong, or maybe they changed the spelling because they wrote Cletus Cassidy, they wrote his last name incorrect, which I don't know if I'm wrong. Maybe they changed his name spelling during some point, but I'm fairly certain Cassidy was always spelled Cassidy, but they spelled it Kasady. I don't know if that was intentional or if it was a misspell, an error or something, which I'm not hating if it is. I feel like I'm being way too critical. I'm really sorry if you really like this comic. If you really like this comic, I'm happy that you do. And I'm not trying to be mean or anything by any means. I just not the biggest fan of this comic so far, other than the second story, which I think I is probably one of my favorite like symbiote stories altogether. Not even Carnage stories, but symbiote. Like I prefer that over a lot of Venom stories even. I think it made Carnage such a interesting villain, which he always has been. But I think it really hit the beat with how complex Carnage really is and how manipulative he can be, which I hope we see more of maybe in the next issue. If we don't, I might end up not reviewing the entire comic. But there's only 6 issues, so I probably will end up reviewing the entire comic because I probably tend to stop in the middle of it if there's only 6 issues. Either way, I would say I rate this comic maybe a 7 out of 10, 6.5 out of 10. I don't know. Because the whole My Red Hands, I would give it like an 11 out of 10, but the other stories kind of weigh this comic down. So I don't really know if it'd be like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. I'll probably just, okay, the first story to me was a 1 out of 10. I'm going to be honest. Second story to me, 11 out of 10. It was better than great. Third story, probably like a 6 or 7 out of 10. It wasn't bad. It was just a little more than middle generic.